All right, let me start by saying the Mecum auction here in Kissimmee, and I'm sure they run it in a similar way in other cities. It's $30 to get in. That's the cheapest ticket to get in. I think a 3-day pass is like I don't know, $70, so you save some money there. $15 to park, and you don't get to go into where they're actually auctioning off the cars. I don't know how much it costs to get in there, but it's not a place where I would go to buy a car unless you're a collector and you got a ton of money. In that case, if all you do with your cars is put them in a big warehouse and look at them and have some select friends take a look at the cars, yeah, no problem. Because you can't start the car, you can't really look under it. You're buying a pig in a poke. That's the way it is. Now, granted, some of these cars are just beautifully restored, much better than they actually were new, especially the American cars and the European cars as well. The paint wasn't near what you're seeing today. These are mainly base coat, clear coat paint jobs. Back in the day, it was just base coat, and the panels didn't line up originally. There was a lot of problems with the cars. In fact, when you would bring your car in back in the day for a 1,000-mile checkup, you'd have a whole list of stuff that was the problem. Rattles and squeaks, especially on Corvettes, were just terrible. Mechanical problems as well. And if they've restored a car and made it actually better than knew where the problems were in the car and fixed those problems, and there's some restorers who do that. I know there's one out in Miami, a Horsepower Warehouse, and I suggest you take a look at his YouTube site because he tells you that he specializes in C2 Corvettes and he knows all the problem areas. He can do it exactly as it was, brand new from the factory, or he can improve it. And if you plan on driving the car, I would go with the improvements. He knows where the reliability problems were. For instance, if you had just a single brake master cylinder, he's going to put in a dual brake master cylinder, much safer, because in the older cars, if you lost your rear brakes, your front brakes went as well. But it doesn't happen with the dual master cylinder. That's just an example. But if it restored exactly as it was new, so that you could win 100 points in different car shows, yeah, that's fine if you're really not going to drive the car. But if you plan on driving the car, yeah, you probably want it improved as much as possible. Back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, even through the mid-80s, quality control was not number one with American manufacturers. Job number one was to get them down the assembly line as quickly as possible. If a problem arises, they would hope that the dealer would fix it, or you'd go there, like I said, with your list after 1,000 miles of all the problems that you're having with the car. That's just the way it was. People accepted that because really there was no competition in those days. Later on, as the Japanese started bringing in Toyotas and Datsuns, and people realized that you could buy a cheap car that had a great paint job and didn't have any rattles or squeaks, and the reliability was excellent, well, American manufacturers had to catch up and do a much better job. They have now. No question about it. But up until about 85, by 85 until the present time, yeah, the quality of American cars has gotten a lot better. So if you're going there to buy a car that you plan on driving, yeah, you might be disappointed. Like I said, you just really don't know what you're getting unless you happen to know who went over the car and who restored it and how they restored it, etc. If you know that person does great work, well, then you might go along with paying the outrageous prices that they get for these cars. If you knew what they were originally, like the Barracuda, a Hemi Cuda, sticker price is $4,700, which wasn't cheap back in the day. That would be equivalent to about $38,000 today. None of these cars were cheap cars back then. Especially in the late 60s, early 70s, you could buy. There's a ton of cars you could buy brand new for $2,000 or less, like Volkswagen Beetles and a Datsun 510, etc. So these cars were. The cheapest one would be about a Nova Super Sport that listed for MSRP of $3,400, and up to, well, if you look at the Shelbys, they were always more, about $1,000 more than the average Mustang. In fact, the Shelbys did okay up until they came out with the Mach 1 in '69, and then people figured, well, I'm getting the same motor and the car looks great. Why would I go for the extra $1,000 or $2,000 for a Shelby when I can get a Mach 1. And that pretty much caused the end of the Shelby Mustangs. I think 70 was the last year for them. 69 and 70 were the exact same car. And I love the front end on the Shelbys in 60, 69, and 70. In fact, when they came out with the 71 Mustang, much bigger car, but they copied that Shelby's front end on those. So if you're going there to get yourself a buy on a classic car, it's possible. I think that's a rare situation. Generally, you're going to pay a lot more for a car at these auctions, whether it be Mecum or Barrett-Jackson or any of these places. They always seem to go for a lot more money than what you could find on your own when it's not at an auction from a seller or even a dealer. Now, if you go to one of these classic car dealers, yeah, you could take a mechanic with you or have a complete inspection of the car. If they won't let you do that, I wouldn't buy from them, but most of those dealers will, whereas you can't do any of that here at a Mecum auction. You're just hoping for the best. And as I said, it doesn't matter if you're buying one of these beautifully restored cars just to put in your collection, never drive it. Who cares about reliability? It's going to be sitting in a warehouse or a museum somewhere. And the history of these cars, it was balls to the walls from about 1965 up until 1970. What I mean by that is each manufacturer was trying to build a faster car, and about 1969, 70 or so, the insurance companies got really wise to this. They knew that young people were buying these cars and they were crashing them at an alarming rate. And I mean alarming. So insurance, they went by power to weight ratio. The more horsepower to weight, the more expensive it was going to be. Average, 17, 18-year-old kid up to age 25 was going to pay $1,500 a year just for insurance. That might seem cheap by today's standards, but back then, the car was $4,000, and now you got to pay $1,500 a year. So by 1970, the height of the muscle car era, I would have to say, well, sales started to go down in 1971, and then the government got really involved in the EPA with emissions and all kinds of smog pumps, and they required the unleaded gas, and that meant that the compression ratios had to come down. So I think in 71 there were Fords and it was Ford and Dodge. They still had high compression, but in 72 they all lowered the compression. You had to then advertise your not the horsepower as previously, but because before, when they would evaluate the horsepower, is generally on a motor that wasn't switched or hooked up to power steering or anything like that. So the actual figures really sometimes were low end, or sometimes they lied and said they were more than they actually were. But when they started with the low compression motors, the horsepower figures went way down. More and more smog choking stuff went on the cars. And here we see this is a 1970. This is beautiful. This is the epitome of muscle cars. This was the 454, 450 horsepower. Beautiful cars, extremely fast, so fast that the average person really had a problem controlling the car if you stepped just a little bit too hard on the gas. To keep those tires from spinning, even in third or fourth gear, was really tough. The tire technology has come such a long way. I had a friend who he was 17 years old. His mother co-signed for him. He got a LS6 Chevelle, paid $4,200 for it. It was an M22 Rock Crusher, 410 gears, black, white stripes, just a beautiful car. And he liked to have a few beers as he went out cruising. So, of course, within 6 months, he crashed it. And I think it was $3,000 damage. 6 months later, when he got the car back, he crashed it again and it was totaled. And that's what happened to so many of these cars. Here we see this is a 1970 Ford Torino GT. It's got the 429 motor. This is the pinnacle of horsepower from the muscle car era. After 70, 71, it started to go down. Here's a beautiful Boss 429. They just made these for 69 and 70, and it was to homologate these for the NASCAR. Funny thing is, they put it in a Mustang. They had to modify these cars, send it to another shop just to get the motor to fit in there. I don't know why they didn't just put it in their Torino, which is what they were racing at NASCAR, but this is what they did. Very rare car. These are going for $250,000 to $500,000. Just crazy money today. Shelby's, like I said, by 70, that was the last year for the Shelby Mustangs, because the Mark 1 gave you almost as good looking a car, and you could get the exact same motor and same performance for $1,000 to $1,500 less. Of course, the Shelbys now are worth a lot more money. But I remember when the gas crisis hit in 1973 and you couldn't get gas, and they had odd even numbers, and some gas stations were closed up. It was really a nightmare. You could find Shelby Mustangs on used car lots for like $2,500. A car like this you would find on a used car lot, $2,500, $3,000. They couldn't give these cars away. Well, I hope you enjoyed this. Hope you enjoyed the commentary. Please comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to my new channel.